This episode is brought to you by SMZH, your independent go-to partner in all matters relating to finance, insurance, real estate, tax and law for both private and corporate clients. To find out more, go to smzh.ch. SMZH, tailor-made, holistic for you.
Kids need to learn how to study, and they need to learn how they learn vocabulary and maths, etc. But at the end, I think we need to educate them to be responsible people with values, like this very old-fashioned word of this humanistic approach on life. And I think we need to teach our kids more to reflect about life.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Sylvan.
Aurelia, very well welcome to the Swisspreneur podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks for inviting me.
You are an advisory and board member, the former foreign minister of Liechtenstein, and also a very active businesswoman all over. And before we actually talk about your career, what is standing out is the intersection between politics, law, and business. You're a lawyer by training. You spent 10 years in Liechtenstein's government, and nowadays you're a member of the extended executive board at SMZH. That's a very broad range. So which of these three different fields has been your favorite so far?
Oh, that's honestly a very difficult question, because I always in my life, I tried to do what I really like, and I tried to find environments where I think I can really add a value. Yeah. And that was in politics the case. And today, to be very frank, at SMZH, this environment, this is where I can add a value, or at least I have the feeling I can add a value, a very entrepreneurial environment. So I just have fun there.
So it's sort of the mix of all the three and the variety in that sense.
Yes. I mean, you said I'm a trained lawyer, and my first job, obviously, of course, it was work as a lawyer. Yep. And to be very frank, I didn't like my job.
Why not?
It was so, I felt so lonely. I was at a very, very representative, like big law firm in the heart of Zurich. So I had a beautiful office, and I had people around me who supported my work. So everything should have been fine. I just didn't, I enjoyed studying a lot, but I didn't enjoy the lonely work as a lawyer. So I felt very lonely. I was missing the interaction with people. And this is why, as well, one of the reasons I went into politics and did different things other than just like working as a very, very classical lawyer.
Yeah, because there in politics, you always have to deal with people in that sense. I wonder, what made you study law in the beginning? Like, why did you choose that subject and not business or other sciences in that sense?
To be very frank, it's because of a teacher. At high school, we had a very small amount of lessons in law. So we had some lessons in economy and a very small amount of lessons in law. So, and there we just read texts, and then we had a case. And with the case, we needed to solve somehow or answer with the acts lying beside it. And I just enjoyed finding answers in between the lines. Nice. So somehow I think it's because of the teacher we had by the time.
Because that was such a good experience for you. You enjoyed it so much.
Yes, and the teacher was great. And then we started to talk about philosophical questions in relation to law. So should suicide be, I just recall, should suicide be something we allow in our acts or we shouldn't allow? Or should a break of a pregnancy be allowed or not be allowed? And in Liechtenstein, it was not allowed by the time. So we had very, very strong as well political or philosophical discussions. Right. And this is what I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed my studies in Fribourg a lot.
So there you could also do that. So that's why you enjoyed studying, but then the thing got missing.
Yes, the interaction, the discussion got missing somehow. And this like society element got missing some, not society element, the element of politically discussing about subject.
Tell us then how you got into politics. So you said, I'm not happy working all by myself. I need people. I want to interact with people. So politics is the way to go. But then from, working in a law firm in Zurich to politics in Liechtenstein, it's a bit of transition, right? So how did you pull that off? Exactly. How did that work?
It was never my intention to become a politician. I was working in Zurich, and then I really didn't enjoy it. So I thought, what could I do? And then out from my office in Zurich, I applied for jobs in London. So I first went to London, and there I worked as a lawyer in a very, very fast-moving and growing environment, IT environment. And that's what I really, really enjoyed. So I could use my knowledge as a lawyer, but at the same time, I was confronted with daily business and daily questions. So that I was working day and night, but I enjoyed it. And then I came back from Zurich, and then I was asked by a business forum in Liechtenstein, and they were holding the first business forum for women in Liechtenstein, and they asked me if I wanted to speak there. And of course I said, of course I go and speak there. And then a couple of weeks before the event took place, I saw that by the time the federal councillor, Doris Leuthard, was the speaker just before me.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So Doris Leuthard spoke before me, and of course, because she was there, the whole bunch of politicians were sitting in the audience, and then of course they as well listened to me. And the day after, from both parties, I got a phone call, and they said, we need to talk to you. And that was basically the start. And then they asked me whether I wanted to run and wanted to campaign.
That's pretty cool. So you left a very good impression in that sense.
I hope so. Most probably, yeah.
How did you then make that decision? So both political parties wanted to talk to you. How did you, make the decision where you should engage further?
I mean, we are a tiny, small country. So we have by now we have 40,000 inhabitants. And basically, if you come out from a big Liechtenstein family, you basically grow into a political party. Yeah. And I'm very frank, this was my case as well. So from my household, where I grew up and the way I grew up in a very political family. I grew up in a black political family. Yeah. So the other big party would be red. So my political party is the Black Party. So I grew up there, and it was obvious I could have never run for the Red Party. It would have been stupid not possible to do that. So I ran in the Black Party, and I needed to learn a lot. And at the end, the decision if I wanted to run or not, you need to somehow survive elections.
Of course.
By the time I was 32 years old, I didn't have a family, no kids, no nothing. Yeah. So I said, the worst thing in my life that can happen, if I don't succeed, I need to move back in my parents' house, and I have to sleep in my tiny children bed I used until I moved out. So this was kind of the worst case scenario, and I said, I can do that.
Amazing.
So it was a lot of risk.
But that was also a bit of a change, because then eventually in London, you had the job and the activities that you actually enjoyed doing compared to Zurich before. Why was it then still the right step to go into politics after you found your calling, so to speak, in London?
I mean, I realized in the discussions very early, if you sit in an executive, as in the government, you have a lot of power to change things. And I have so many visions of what one could do with in a small state. I had this feeling I can change, I can manage things, I can grow in the job. So I just wanted to do it. And I was curious, very curious.
So that was a logical next transition then for you to really go and change things into politics. You were Minister of Foreign Affairs, Justice and Culture. That's, again, a very blend mix of different topics in different areas. Which of these was the most challenging for you to work on?
I think that's a question I can't answer. Yeah. Because, from a background, I'm a lawyer, so law somehow made a lot of sense. And the way I grew up and lived before foreign politics, that was kind of passion. That was pure passion because I was so interested in international politics as well. And culture, I grew up with having the possibility out from my education to play a lot of music. So it made just a lot of sense. But I think the most difficult part was to learn how politics really is working. So it was not the mixture and the broad plate I had in front of me. It was more finding the right people around me and grow together. I mean, I was extremely young, so obviously I needed to grow in my job, and I needed to grow together with my team. So most probably that was the biggest challenge, realizing that.
And how do you pull that off? Because growing together as a team, that's not only important in politics, but also in any business that you could potentially be involved in. So how do you make that work? How does a great team, a dream team, so to speak, work and grow together?
One thing I needed to learn, you cannot, as a boss, you cannot control everything.
Yeah.
Having trust into your people, I think is one. I'm a bit of a control freak out of my temper.
Yeah.
So having this trust that people do their job just like extremely good, and everybody wants to add a value. Everybody. I think every single collaborator I ever had wanted to leave a small step in the path of growing our team and changing things. And I think as well today in business, this trust, having trust into people, but as well guiding them and asking them to perform more and more. It doesn't mean working 20 hours or something, but having this trust, you can deliver more. You can be like best in class for what you can do.
Yeah. But I imagine many entrepreneurs, especially, they feel similar to you. You know, they want to control everything. They want to make sure everything is perfect with their product, the service that they're offering. That's also sort of a transformation that you as a person, as an individual, have to go through to be able to let go. How do you do that? Because that's a learning curve that many entrepreneurs probably also have to go through at one point.
Mm-hmm. I think I learned the most when I did the yearly or twice per year, we did kind of this like open discussion with my collaborator. How did you perform? What do you expect? So kind of this career planning. Yeah. And out of those discussions, I think out of my my close team that like really spoke very openly with me. Yeah. I think this is the place where I really learned I can trust these people, and they can only do their work properly if I really trust them. Yeah. And it's out of this discussion, I think, where I could really, really grow and have this confidence we are working as a team.
So by talking about it and asking and also giving feedback at the same time.
Yes. And I think something I as well learned is sometimes telling your staff, this is very difficult for me, or I cannot do this perfectly, so I need your help. I'm not perfect in this, so I need your help. You're better in this, but somehow we have to manage it. And by the time I was the person standing in front, so I need your support and giving the people this feeling. I am an important part of this puzzle in order we can realize this big picture. Yeah.
So also showing vulnerability and asking for help from your team when it's needed.
Yes. And most probably this question of being authentic is most probably a very important one.
I like that. But when you mentioned feedback, that just rings a bell. I also like to ask for feedback. I do that once or twice a year. I just send a little survey. Where do you see my strengths and where do you see my weaknesses? And people can leave feedback. Some write a lot, some just write a few bullet points. And you can do it anonymously or you can leave your name. And that's very eye-opening because then I always see what do people appreciate that I do, maybe things that I wasn't even aware of. And also, where do they think I should, maybe improve or where I'm not that good at? And then you can make a conscious decision where you say, hey, this is maybe something that someone else should handle because I'm simply not good at.
Did you ever change like really things in your, yes?
Yeah, like financials. Like I love personal finance on an individual level, but for me, company finances, like expenses and accounting, bookkeeping, that stuff just bores me to death. I like to have the visions and sales stuff, etc. So then I had to get people on board who enjoyed that part so I could hand it over. So that was a very important thing because I knew for me, this takes so much energy to do. And now, even if I put all my energy in it, I don't do a good job. So that's
rings a bell on my side as well. and for example, I was not good like in planning, in doing my own agenda or like planning a trip. So they constantly ask me, which flight do you want to take? I mean, no idea what is happening before and after. So somebody needed to do it. But then you need to have the strength to never complain.
Exactly.
This is just how it is organized. And
you let it go, but then you also have to let them run and you don't interfere. They do it their own way. That's very important. Yeah. So it's cool. We both have these learning experiences. One other thing, when we talk about culture, that's also something I like to dive a bit deeper. In Switzerland, also in Liechtenstein, you have very high quality of living. We have incredible standards on all levels. And often we're very business or innovation focused. And it sometimes feels a bit, okay, everyone tries to fit in a bit or is very business focused. Do we sometimes in these very high standard of living countries neglect the arts and culture a bit?
Yesterday evening, I was talking exactly about this subject. And I put the hypothesis on the table and I said, I think we tend to forget how important culture for our society is and how important culture and this kind of rubbing, like having different ideas and opinions on cultural things is, so there is a cohesion in society. And we tend, I don't know, but maybe it is just a personal thing. But I have the impression that in society, we don't talk that much about culture this or that, or do I agree with this? Or once in Zurich, you had this theater, a Schauspielhaus, Schlingensief, and they had the naked people on stage. This was the time I was very young and I was living in Zurich. And then everybody was discussing and arguing whether this is good or not. And at the moment, I just have this feeling we tend to forget the importance of culture and we tend to forget the culture costs. It costs us as a society or through taxes, etc. On the other hand, I think it gives our society a huge feedback. And I'm lacking this feedback because I have this feeling society is not discussing properly. As well in politics, we are not leading a discussions. It's shaming and naming and we point fingers and we are unhappy, or a lot of people at least are unhappy. Yeah. But we don't have the discussion how we constructively can change things.
That's a bit, if you look a bit further, like it's happening in the US at the moment, right? It's very left and right, and there's not much conversation happening in between.
Exactly. Or in Germany, a lot of people say, I mean, I have no alternative other than voting for AfD. But just saying I'm like frustrated, this is why I'm doing. Of course, there are voters who want that, but I'm just frustrated, and this is the only thing I can do because I'm not happy with this part. I think is not a proper answer. I think we should discuss what is the reason why we are not happy. What is the reason why we think we don't have the right people we want to elect? Why do we think they're not doing a good job? And at the same time, we think politicians should be perfect people. So they are not allowed to make a mistake. And if they make a mistake, we immediately sue them. Yeah. So I think as a society, we really need to be careful to enter again into a proper dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the causes of this. Why is this happening right now? Why are we not talking to each other or about these things? Why do we lack this dialogue that is so urgently needed?
Is it eventually because we need more culture? That would be a thesis we could put on the table. But that cannot be the only reason. I think people, they say things, but they don't take the consequence. Mm-hmm. So if I do something, I think I need to stand for the consequence. I cannot blame somebody else. Exactly. And this should count, I think, for everybody. So,
walking the talk in that sense.
Yes, walking the talk, but then as well doing something. So I'm not allowed to say we don't have good enough politicians, or they're not well in Germany. They always say they're not well educated. So I don't want to talk about Switzerland, but they're not enough educated. But they sit in Bundestag. Yep. So we are unhappy, but at the same time, nobody stands up and say you can. I'm there. If you want to elect me, I'm there. And then we have a lot of social media, and people often say, I don't want to have the burden of being like crossed out by social media and having the whole burden of social media. So I think as a society, we need to try to be more careful again. How do we talk about people? How do we assess people? Why do we think a politician needs to be a perfect person? Of course, they should try to be perfect and stand to the values, but we think they need to be super perfect.
It's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic. Or Christian Wolff, I think the former president of Germany. I think that's an extremely good example. I mean, media chased him like day and night through the papers. And then he lost everything. He lost his job. He lost his family, divorce, everything. Mm-hmm. And at the end, nothing is coming out.
Yeah.
So what are we as a society doing? And nobody takes the responsibility of having done that. It just happened.
Of course. That's a very dangerous thing, like the responsibility part. We talked a bit about it before we hit the record button. And I feel people just criticize, but they don't bring any solutions, right? They don't want to change things, or at least some people, not all of them, but some people don't want to change things. They just criticize no matter who's in power or what's happening. It's always wrong and not good, but they are not there to change things for the good. They just criticize, which is the easy spot to take, right? Because you can always criticize everything.
Yeah, or to have a constructive discussion.
And not even that is happening.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, with Christian Wolff, it was never a constructive discussion. Why has he eventually done that or something? It was just a court case. And it was just like making somebody dead through media, the way we wrote about him and talked about him. So I think this responsibility, I mean, would it be me in that place? Or this other minister, Theodor von Gutenberg? I mean, that was when because it was said he didn't write his thesis all by his own.
Right, yeah.
Of course, I mean, I wrote a doctoral thesis. Yeah. Okay, so I say everybody should write it by him or herself. Of course, that's my thinking. Yeah. But chasing somebody who does a brilliant job out of Germany, he moved to the US for 7 years. Is that what we really want? Is each of us like very perfect? I don't think so.
Of course not. Yeah, no one is.
Yes.
So the big question then remains, how can we change that? How can we motivate people to stop criticizing and start taking actions and actually contribute to change things for the better?
Taking responsibility, I think. Yeah. And I think each of us needs to be careful when we criticize. What is my answer? What is my constructive part in the discussion to change it? And honestly, I think I have 2 kids, and they follow daily press. Or my son, at least, he's 12, so he follows daily press. And I sometimes he sees a headline, and then his thumb goes up or down. I mean, within seconds, without like reflecting what is the whole story behind. He says, I find this good or bad. Yeah. And of course, I lead a discussion with him about doing that or not doing that. But I think a lot of us, because we consume media and information so quickly in our days, we tend to forget to ask what is standing behind.
Right. We're very fast to judge before we sometimes even understand. And for you as a mother, you can have an influence in the conversation with your kids, which you do.
So, yes.
But on a societal level, that's more difficult. We probably need someone also to put in the work there and to make that happen, that we have more role models that, hey, I actually take responsibility. I don't just criticize. I don't like this. So now I go into politics, for example, and I want to change this. Is it like more role models that we need to make that change happen on a society level?
Maybe as well we support the people that have the strength and the guts to stand there. Maybe we should try to support them sometimes more. I mean, if we disagree, of course we shouldn't say, I agree with you if you really disagree, but enter into a dialogue other than just like going through social media and pushing somebody with like 2 or 3 sentences down. Right. I think this is the problem, like entering into a proper dialogue. I mean, as a politician, that's your main job. As a politician, you need to find majorities and you need to find your good arguments. And I just like spontaneously, I recall one case where I had a total different opinion to the other people sitting around this round table. And they were talking with me, arguing like meeting after meeting. And after a couple of meetings, I had to tell them, your arguments are better than mine. But we tend to forget that we need good arguments on the table. And as well, it doesn't depend where you stand. If you are a boss or an entrepreneur or you're a politician, you need to be able to change your mind without losing your face.
Exactly. And that's a very also cultural thing in that sense. We talked about you being a mother, but you were also the Minister of Education. So I wonder, with what we just discussed, what role does education play in that regard? Because that's sort of the next generations that we educate and bring up, and we can make it or break it in that sense.
I mean, this is something like I really advocate for, that at schools, we do not only, I mean, of course, kids need to learn how to study, and they need to learn how they learn vocabulary and maths, etc. But at the end, I think we need to educate them to be responsible people with values, like this very old-fashioned word of humanistische Erziehung. What is that in English?
Humanistic education, I would say.
Yes, this humanistic approach on life. And I think we need to teach our kids more to reflect about life and what they do and don't do. And especially as well with artificial intelligence coming up. I mean, I saw my son recently. He had to write a text on a subject. So he went to ChatGPT and like 2 minutes later it was done.
Of course, yeah.
And then we lead a discussion. I mean, school is changing. And I think we have a lot of we have tons of possibilities with artificial intelligence as well, how we can support our kids better. But the only resource we have in Switzerland, and especially in Liechtenstein, because we are so small, is our human capital and is our kids. So we need to educate people that are able to stand up and stand for their values.
And in that sense, that's our biggest assets, the brightest minds in that sense.
Yeah.
But if you then look at the technology changing super fast, so even 3-4 years ago, it was not possible to write this whole article with AI, but our school system seems to be pretty old and not being updated as fast as technology in that sense. So how does that work together? The brightest minds are so important for our countries like Liechtenstein, Switzerland. At the same time, it seems that the school system is pretty outdated at the same time. How does that work together? Is that a big gap and a big challenge that we need to solve?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges, at least, I mean, speaking for my country, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we need to solve. And I mean, it's not a question of like blaming somebody.
Of course.
I think as a society, we need to be open to discuss about changes. And that's a society question. It's not a question of a teacher or a head of a school. It's a society question. Are we open to change our school system as a whole? How do we bring like the most talented teachers back into our schoolrooms again? My kids, both of them have very good teachers. The most important thing is not the system, is the good teacher that is standing in front of them. And for me and for my career, it was the teacher I had most probably it was, I don't recall, but 2 lessons per week. Yeah. He made me follow a dream I just created because I had a good teacher. And that's what it is at the end really about.
So how can we get there? How can we have the best teachers back in the classroom? Is it only about paying them adequately, or what do we miss to make that happen?
I think being a teacher lost this kind of like big standing. I think if you look, 30 years back, 40 years back, a teacher beside a priest and most probably a politician, the teacher and the doctor in a small town or village, they were the people that were asked, is this good or not good? So they had a say and people were listening to them. Yep. And I think we need, as well as families, we need to come back to a position where we think the teacher is an extremely important role for my kids. So my kids spend, 5 hours, 6 hours per day in a schoolroom. Yeah. And that's where we need the best role models and most motivated people. And I think, at least this is what I feel, with this very diverse society we are having as well, very diverse kids that enter into one schoolroom, I think we would need smaller classes. Even though from a scientific perspective, that's not the most important aspect, but a lot of teachers are at the edge of what they can do in a classroom. Of course,
it's very exhausting to train and to work with so many kids.
Yes. And then some of them, they don't speak German, some have other issues. Yeah. So it's like this very heterogenic school class they are facing. And I think we need to give them more support. And I think the standing of the teacher needs to become a higher one again.
No. But that's again a thing that the society needs to change in that sense, to view the job of a teacher with a high standing.
Yes. And I mean, this is very unpopular to say, but I personally think teachers need to get paid better. Right. I mean, if you look back, years back, a teacher had, in terms of society, if you compare, a very, very good salary. And today, this is not the case anymore.
Yeah. And then if you have all the bright minds, then they want to go into finance, for example, where you get paid more and not become a teacher. And that's an issue.
Yeah.
I see. You also told me when we did the prep call for the interview that there was a blackout in Liechtenstein once. How is that related to education? Please tell us that story.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I mean, by the time I was a minister and we had like a total phone and internet blackout in Liechtenstein. So literally we couldn't work. So together with my team, we were sitting in my office at my meeting table and we were literally drinking coffee in the morning and nobody could do anything. So we were sitting there and chit-chatting, and then one of my team members came up and was like, this is ridiculous. I mean, we are all extremely well educated and we have a blackout and none of us is like, and he was having his phone in front of him. And he said, none of us has a real idea what is happening and why, what is the cause and how should we solve it and how should we deal with this situation. Right. So the discussion ran and we came up with the idea at the end, our kids need to learn programming. So that was an initial thing. So we discussed, and then a bit later, we were Googling when our system was running again. We invited a professor from ETH to come to my offices, and we discussed about this subject. And it was Professor Ronkovic from ETH, and he is studying children's minds. So we learned how important it is for children to learn at a very, very early stage how systematic work is going and how logical, systematic thinking can not be implanted, but how kids can learn it and how differently the mind develops. So it was clear for me, our kids in Liechtenstein need to learn that. And then we made a pilot, and 3 years later, my kids started to go to school and they are programming at school.
Amazing.
So it was out of this blackout. This is the story that came out. And I just think this is what made me like loving politics so much, because
you can really change stuff.
Yeah.
I love that. This is so cool because I think this is a really nice story that shows how you took responsibility to hopefully avoid that in the future, but also how you actually invest in the next generation and change things for the better. I like that a lot. Let's leave politics for a second. You are nowadays a member of the Extended Executive Board at the SMZH, which provides solutions in the areas of finance, insurance, real estate, and mortgages, to name just a few. First of all, how did you actually get involved with SMZH? Because that, again, seems like a big jump. First from London to Liechtenstein politics, and then from politics to the board of SMZH here in Zurich.
It came down to, I was self-employed, so I was working on Mondays. And then I got to know our CEO, Xim Hasani. I was introduced to him and I was immediately fascinated about his entrepreneurial spirit. Right. I liked what he was doing. I liked his spirit. And it was one discussion after the other. And then we started with a very small amount of work. And it grew more and more and more. Yeah. And I started to love the company. And the initial thought why I had this kind of, wow, this is really cool, was the reason that if you are 19 years old and you have 1,000 Swiss francs on your bank account and you just finished your vocational training or something, you get the complete same service as if you are like a millionaire, you're 17 years old, your own company. So it's for everybody. And I, as well through my own story, I like this approach that everybody gets an advice. And everybody, it doesn't depend how much you have on your bank account. You can always do somehow a little bit better with your finances. Nice. This is what I really liked about it.
That's a great motivation. And as a member of the extended executive team, what are sort of your tasks? How do I have to envision a day in your work life?
What I like, it's extremely diverse. So I do a lot of strategic work. As a company, we are growing enormously. So we need good talents to be on board. We need to grow strategically. And we just opened one of our new branches in Chur, what is close to my home. So there is a lot of movement. I meet people. Of course, I talk to potential clients. This is a part of my work. I take care of my people that are working in books. That's the branch I'm officially leading and heading. So it's a very diverse job.
And tell us a bit more, who are your clients? I know you work with both private but also corporate clients. Who are the typical SMZH clients that you work with?
I mean, there is no typical client. This is what I like so much about it, because it can be like the 19 or 18-year-old young woman that has a very small amount of money and says, Aurelia, that's not what I do personally, but our people do that. What do I need to do so I can buy like a small 2-room apartment once I'm 30? What is the best plan? How can I save a little bit of taxes so I can achieve a lot in my life, so I can go through a career? Or a very nice one for me is, I like women in business. Yeah. And there are surprisingly a lot of women that are self-employed. But a lot of them face the same challenges I faced when I went out of politics to be self-employed. I mean, you start your own company, and on an administrative side, you face so many challenges. And I'm a lawyer, but I didn't know a lot of the answers. Yeah. So we are supporting them. I mean, we are standing by their side, advising them what kind of company is the right one, what form would be the right one, what do you do with your taxes, how do you deal with social insurances, So we stand by their side, and this is a part I like a lot, because personally I went through a similar story.
Yeah, so you can really relate. You know where the struggle is in that sense.
Oh, yes.
Do you also work with any startups in that sense?
Yes, we do startups as well. Yeah. We have a strong focus on small and medium-sized company. Yeah. So startups, I mean, at the beginning, of course, they're new and small, but we are a partner to advise what is the right form, how do you develop, what are the good places you can be, what do you need to be careful on. We are a partner for them.
Great. And since you also have the legal background, what are some aspects that we need to change in Switzerland when it comes to the legal aspects of startups to make their life easier or even make them more successful?
I mean, I would tend to ask you, what do you think? I personally have the experience as well, talking, of course, with a lot of people who have a startup or just like started a small company, that like founding a company is not the most difficult part, because we have a lot of institutions you can ask, and they give support. Yep. A very difficult part comes on an administrative side afterwards. Mm-hmm. How do I do my insurances? Which insurances do I need? How do I do day sickness money? What size do I need? How do I insure myself? I mean, if I would become sick. So there are a lot of questions. And usually it was, to be frank, in my case as well, I started to become self-employed and I didn't have an insurance for sickness. Yeah. So you say, I do that once my company is running, but you do what is the right stage and timing to do it, to ask these questions. So I think you need good partners. You can openly speak about finances, how to do it, when to do it, and eventually as well running a risk somewhere. You decide, at the moment I don't, but maybe in 8 months from now, I think I can. So this is a time where I actively take a risk. Yeah. But you need a partner to discuss about these things, I think.
Yeah, because you already have enough stuff going on with your business probably, so you don't want to also learn and handle all of the legal/administrative parts.
Oh, yes. And account, that was horrible for me. I mean, doing accounts and like dinner or a flight, but that was horrible for me. Just until I got myself like the discipline to properly do it. Yeah. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because you have a vision, you want to do, you want to work, you want to be out, you want to make it run, and then it runs, and you have an administrative part you need to deal with.
Yeah, and also from a legal aspect, I think it depends a bit on the different states in Switzerland, but we still have a taxation issue on stock options, especially.
Yes.
So that's something we need to solve. For example, the canton of Zurich is very, very restrictive. So that's not a very good environment for founders to be in, or for startup employees, better said. We have an issue with like visas from third-party countries in that sense, outside of Europe. You have a lot of talent, the bright minds that we talked about. So I think there we also have some homework to do to make sure that we can get the best people in to have a positive effect in Switzerland. Mm-hmm.
And I think from a political perspective, I think we as well need to ask ourselves the question, how much do we want it to cost us? I mean, do we want to actively support startups? Do we allow them not to pay taxes? at the beginning.
Yeah.
Or I mean, we ask them to pay taxes as soon as a startup has profit. We ask them to pay taxes.
Yeah.
But if a startup goes negative, we don't support the startup. So I think it's a very, very political question. How much do we want it for our society to cost us, and how attractive do we want to be? I advise a company, and they just started a daughter firm out in a European third country. I mean, the attractive surrounding we face there. No taxes for an X amount of years, ground for free because they want the company to start there. Yeah. So it's a total different environment. Of course, as well, politically, it's a different environment. Sure. But I think sometimes as well in Switzerland, and especially in Liechtenstein, we should more actively discuss what do we really want.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like, from my perspective or experience, I feel I'm a big fan of the free market in that sense, that I think too much subsidies or something will maybe be even counterproductive, that you keep businesses alive that should not be alive because it's just not working. But for example,
totally agree.
We as a nation, do we want to invest in startups? Because if you look at Switzerland, we have fabulous technology companies, and many of them struggle to get growth funding once they, hit the market in Switzerland and then maybe expand internationally. And many of the investors then come from abroad, especially from the US, from China, etc. And then if there's an exit, where does the money go? It goes abroad. And you educate these founders in Switzerland. You help them to start with incentive programs and all of that. But then you miss the last very important part, funding for growth. And we have money in Switzerland and in Liechtenstein. We should rethink if we don't want to deploy more of that money into high growth, very scalable startups to also reap the benefits of all the investments we made before.
Totally agree. And one other point, I mean, adding a little bit into the same subject is as well, how much do we want to invest into research? I mean, into our universities. Yeah. A lot of companies, of course, we have extremely good universities and research centers like ETH, etc. I mean, they are brilliant. But how much do we want it to cost us? Should we eventually think that we should invest more into that area? I sometimes talk to Nobel laureates in medicine or physics or so. Yeah. And all of them, I mean, if you start a discussion about funding research, it's always a discussion. Research needs money, and that's a lot of money, but out of that, brilliant things can grow. Yeah. And I think sometimes I fear a little bit that in Switzerland we lose this hub where things can really grow, because through administration, etc., and as well through our political way of looking at it, we just think it's a lot of money. What it definitely is, but we don't see the output at the end.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm no politician, so I'm probably too far away from this matter, but investing more there might be a good idea, but then also making sure you reap the benefits. So you don't just educate and finance the research, but you actually also get a share, or you can invest in the companies that come out of it. And then
definitely.
You have more money to then reinvest.
Yes. I mean, that's how a cycle is running. I mean, that's how Silicon Valley just grew and
there we're missing in Switzerland. We are great at doing the first part, investing, but then we doubt that if we don't see any return coming, because then the returns get all swept up by foreign investors or a big chunk. That's important. We need to be part of that as well.
Yes, and I think as well, I mean, coming back a little bit to the political discussion, when you talk about Horizon and all these programs we have, I mean, it's an enormous amount of money. And if you would take that money and say, teachers get more money or something. Right, yeah. I mean, of course, you have a lot of extremely good arguments, or single educating parents get more money. You can, I mean, I totally understand all the arguments, but at the end, we need to break it down and ask ourselves, how can we make Switzerland an attractive country in all aspects? How can business grow so we have tax income, we have good education, we have the best schools?
Yeah. And that's actually a perfect segue to my future question, so to speak. If you had a crystal ball and you can predict anything for the next 5 years for Switzerland, where do you see the country going? Where do you see opportunities and where do you see threats coming Switzerland's way?
Let us start with the threats.
Sure.
And this coming back to our discussion we had today at the beginning of our talk, I think this losing the ability of a society to rub shoulders on a very controversially, I think this is a threat to us as a society, politically, in total, this is a threat to us. Yeah. And I really advocate for people to really start constructive discussion. And this is where I personally wish we can go. And then if I could look into a crystal ball, I think we have so many opportunities. I mean, I talk now for Liechtenstein, for my country. I think we have upcoming elections as well. So beginning of next year, we have elections. And looking into the crystal ball, I just wish we have a government and a parliament that has this ability to discuss again. So we will have most probably a very big change in Liechtenstein. So there will be a lot of new people. And looking into the crystal ball and putting my wish into the crystal ball, I wish we have constructive people sitting in there who have vision for the country.
And who take responsibility.
Right.
I like that. Now, to wrap up the conversation today, Aurelia, we also have some rapid fire questions for you. I'm just going to ask you the question. You have to answer in one sentence.
Oh, God, that's difficult.
We'll find out. You ready?
Yes, of course.
What is the most valuable lesson that you've learned from your time in government?
Standing up to your values.
Nice. Which book has had the greatest impact on your life?
A book I got for my 12th birthday from Claude Nicollier, the first person from Switzerland who went into the All.
Nice. Yeah. And if you could implement one policy change, not in Liechtenstein, but in Switzerland, tomorrow, what would it be?
That people need to take responsibility for what they did or didn't do.
Perfect. Goes well with what we discussed before.
Yes.
Who has been your greatest inspiration throughout your career?
The sister of my grandmother. We called her Gotta.
Yeah.
And she was a very, very powerful, I mean, no big education, nothing. She was a farmer's woman, but she had such a strong opinion, such a big stand when she was discussing about things, and she was a huge feminist. So she is still up to now. Of course, she died many years ago, but she's still a role model for me.
Amazing. And the last question for you today, what is your favorite way to unwind, to relax after a busy work week?
I run with Lou. Lou is my dog, and I go running with her.
Very nice. Yeah. Aurelia, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you all the best and lots of success.
Thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed the controversial discussion with you. A lot of fun. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.